Hey there, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to say hi to all my Facebook friends, my followers, and for some of you who it seems like I've known forever, I'm probably going to say family. Not flesh and blood, but I feel like I've gained some very close-knit friends from many of you who have been messaging me, emailing, part of the Crest online trainings or a training online in the past, or perhaps I've gone to your school or your district to work with you or your students while you observe. What I also want to ask before we get started is, does it ever frustrate you that the big people upstairs known as TEA seem to take forever doing things that seemingly should have been done a long time ago? Let me just give you a couple of examples. I don't think that the teachers should have had to wait till late August to get the release tests, but for eighth grade math and ninth grade algebra for this past year, those tests still have not been released. You have access to the answer key and the item analysis and supposedly the justification for the answers, but without the actual questions themselves, it kind of renders those score keys useless. The other thing that bothers me, and you can kind of raise your hand in the comment section or type something in the response, is that they still have not given you scoring guides for short answer, for the English language arts, reading and writing, and for those of you who are going to need them for social studies and science. They haven't even given the official rubrics. So as many of you have probably seen, I had to go ahead and use what they've given us so far in terms of the sample tests in each grade level to come up with my own rough draft rubric for short answer and build that as a foundation for the rough draft rubric for extended essay that they gave us one for, but that requires the explanation and the expression of ideas, that where you take an example and you explain it, an example from the evidence that supports your answer to the question or to the topic, and then you explain, express, and explode that answer with great supporting evidence and explaining how it all ties together. So, what I'm going to do for you today is go over the sixth grade sample test. Something that I've done that TEA also has not done is I merged the poem that it came with, the mini paired passage informative that they gave sixth grade, which made answering the extended essay question probably the most difficult one of all. And they've also given us some editing and revising. So one passage of editing and one of revising. So if you have a question, take some notes as you're watching the video. If you need some guidance, feel free to message me, or you can email me at that address. Let me see, let me how to point this when my screen's reversed, at writing_doctor@yahoo.com. You're welcome to go to my website uh, and find all of my cool products I've made to help you in your reading, writing, math, editing, revising, expository, persuasive story journey. So if you need a specific item but don't know how to find it, just message me or email me and I can send you a link to anything. If you are a teacher who are who is not in the CREST online recorded training and would like a copy of this document that we're going to go over today, a PDF document, you just need to email me at writing_doctor@yahoo.com and let me know that you would like the 6th grade sample test where I've merged the passages, the questions, and the different types of constructed responses that are 1 or 2 points, the different 2 short answer questions where they had the passages and the questions in one location on their website, but the answer was in a different location, and I didn't like how that was set up, so I merged them all together in one PDF document. And uh, the other thing is you're going to see some sample revising questions, which means improving the content. So there'll be like an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, usually shorter passages. And so if you're improving the content, you use ARM, add, remove, replace, or move content around. If you're improving the editing, you're fixing errors or you're making corrections depending on the wording of the question of there's an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Again, a shorter passage, but editing a passage is cups, capitalization, usage, punctuation, spelling, and sentence boundaries. Sentence boundaries being make sure that you don't have any run-ons or fragments if it asks you to make corrections. Because if you see the word change real quick or the word error, it's usually a sign of just regular cups, capitalization, usage, punctuation, or spelling. But many of you do not have that second S. And so if you don't have it, you need to put it, get it, make an anchor chart that has it, or you can use mine. Uh, Many of you have already gotten most of my materials, and so I want to be able to go from what I call the known, the 4th through 10th grade sample new item tests and answers, to the unknown, where I send those of you who are in the CREST online trainings actual online tests where you can practice all of these things using the guidelines that TEA has sent us. So let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen. Today's lesson will be using my little face in the corner and my document camera to document and record everything. So basically, in summary, it's the 6th grade ELAR and writing sample new item, the passages, the questions, and all the answers. The first selection is the genre called a poem, and I made notice that the first and last line of each stanza rhymes. There's no rhythm or meter present in the poem. Those are all the things that your students need to read and think about as they begin to follow along. So, should I read the poem first? The answer is, if you look at my face here in the corner, no, or yes. because we have too many kids who are still struggling with reading, understanding the content, I probably need to, instead of reading an entire poem P, I should probably read an entire question Q. So when you say, mind your P's and Q's, do I do the poem or the questions first? The passage or the question? In math, do I do the problem or the question? Well, for kids who struggle with reading, it's highly recommended you have them do the questions, and that way they can look for questions that ask about a piece of the puzzle instead of the whole puzzle, meaning the poem. Okay, so the poem is in a the title is in a weird, very weird location above the picture, the monarch magic. Okay, read the selection and choose the best answer to each question. So what we're going to do is read each question, then we'll read the line or stanza or phrase or word that they're asking about. So let me take you through these. And again, once I finish Crest teachers going through the 6th grade through 10th grade, because if you've been watching my videos, I already posted 3rd through 5th. So if you teach 3rd through 5th, just email me and I can send you this document with the 3rd and the 5th. The only thing I didn't do for 3rd through 5th is put the passages in, and sometimes I didn't let you have or see the answer, but I went over the answer in the question. So let's take a look at question number 1. Okay, so if you look at it, it says 2 correct answers. So right away, you're going to say, okay, that's constructed type. And if you have the folders, either the digital or hard copy, I highly suggest that you make student copies. If you have the digital copy, laminate them, because this top half page is probably the most important, because all of these boxes represent the constructed type responses that we can get. The 2-point questions are going to be based on the colors red and yellow. You'll get 2 of those in reading, worth a total of 4 points. And the extended essay question will go from a 1 to a 2 to a 3 on the organization and development. And then if they have good editing and revising, in other words, if they take the paper to the emergency room of editing and revising and hopefully bring some sort of closure that ties everything together, that means that each of 2 readers could give your students 5 points each. Now, the last 2 passages that we're going to see today are 1 revising with, I believe, 4 questions, and 1 editing with 2 questions. So when you break down the test, let me kind of show you something here. Based on what they've shown us as the preliminary and for 3rd through 8th grade, they seem to be the final blueprints. The total points that your students can get on reading and writing is 52 points. And half of the points are going to be for reading, and about half will be for writing. For 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, for middle school, it'll be 56 points. And again, about half of the points will be for reading and the other half for writing. This is exactly the same way that 9th and 10th grade has been doing it all along. And they used to be getting 68 points, 34 reading and 34 writing. But now they're only going to get 64 points. So let's just do some math here. If the if the extended essay called the writing portion is worth 10 points, then because in 3rd grade, half of the test, about 26 points, is going to be writing. Then 26 minus 10 is 16. So that leaves two passages, possibly, with about 8 questions for editing and 8 questions for revising. Since half of 56 is 28, when you take away the 10 points for extended essay response, which is the writing, that leaves you with 18. So in 6th through 8th grade, they're going to get 2 passages of editing, 2 passages of revising, and if they do it the way it makes the most sense, your students would have about 9 questions of editing and 9 of revising. Editing where they're fixing conventions using cups with 2 S's, and revising when they're fixing the content by changing or improving the organization or development by adding and removing, replacing, or moving content around, such as a word, a phrase, a transition. Now, all editing and revising questions can also have, and you'll see these today, a constructed type response. Keeping in mind that 75% of the points that your students can get approximately, that's the cutoff, that the most multiple choice strictly A, B, C, D, which is the first box here, that your kids can get on an online test marked A, B, C, D are going to be about 75. That means it could be anything under 75. So for every percentage point that the multiple choice goes under 75, that means that the constructed will be increased by 1 point, because for reading, there's always going to be 2 short answer questions worth 2 points each. And for writing, there's always going to be 1 extended essay worth a total of 10 points if 2 different readers give your students a 5 based on these things. Now, when I teach something, I try to make things that are very hard, very simple. So if you see my fingers up in the air, you're seeing the letter W, okay? No matter which hand I hold up, W. If you can remember 2 letters in the alphabet, you can remember my plan for every single multiple choice question, constructed, short answer, and extended. We should not have 15 different structures or formulas or acronyms for learning how to answer questions. So I want to teach you a way, not the way, using just the letters, the letter W, words that start with the W or end with it, or the letter E, words that start with an E. Okay? So, number 1, it said, which lines, plural, from the poem best support the conclusion that the speaker is familiar? We're trying to draw a conclusion here. The speaker is familiar, the speaker being the subject, with the monarch butterfly behavior. Okay, so if the subject is the speaker, the object is the monarch butterfly. What are we talking about? Not the monarch butterfly, but the way that it behaves. So if you're highlighting, you could use, and I wish there was red highlighting on the test, because I like to think of the colors of the traffic light. Red being the question and red being the answer. What is the question and what is the answer? So which W is being used this time? Which. So in the case of number one, because it's two correct answers, the which is this and that. Two different lines. So when you're familiar with something's behavior, you're familiar with the way that it acts, the way that it moves, maybe its attitude if it's a human. So the answers that were on the answer key said that what we'll call letter B would be the first one. I know just where you will go. Okay. Well, if I know something, keep in mind that's first person, where you're going to go, that becomes an idea that, ah, if I know what someone's going to do before they do it, if I know what something is going to do before it does it, that means it's familiar with that behavior. And so in this case, it's an insect, an animal. What's the other one? Destined to find a home in Mexico. Okay. Well, if you look at the other answer choices, white dots and black stripes on rust, that's just uh, imagery using the senses. That doesn't have to do with behavior. How you look is not related to how you act. So we would eliminate that. As you ride on the breeze on the horizon. So if I have to choose between this answer, the third answer, as you ride on the breeze to the horizon and destined to find a home, because this one is more specific to actual behavior, it's going to find a home in Mexico. That's known as migration, moving south for the winter. As you ride the breeze to the horizon is more vague. And so I can see where students would struggle with letter B and C because you ride the breeze to the horizon. What I would tell you is that since this one is already doing it, it's just you're seeing the action. If the object being discussed is not doing it yet, you're destined to find a home in Mexico. It sounds like that's my future. So, because this one talks about something that hasn't happened yet, and so does this one, and this one talks about something, an observation of something that's happening in the present, probably the best answers, uh, if you're familiar with something, you kind of have an idea of how they're going to act in the future. And that's how I would probably choose that one. So the answer to number one was uh, multi-select. And so your kids can keep track. Oh, I got to practice one of those more than one correct answer to a question. Number two-part questions. Okay. It's real important for those of you that are not already aware that usually the first part asks you a question. What is my W? What is the question? What does this word mean? So that's vocabulary. And so you're allowed to use your online or paper dictionary for this. Vital comes Vitalized comes from the root word vital. And part B basically is which word from the poem. In other words, um, the two W's that get you the 2 points is what is the answer? And the second part is always going to be where can you find it? And that means they'll usually give you a line or a phrase or a stanza number. And in this case, they actually gave you the word because it asked which word. And so there's the word, which, as in singular, another W, and where it's at on line 11. So let's take a look. The word vitalized means on line 12. So the best thing is to see something in context. So if I was highlighting, I would highlight, especially since we're not sure about this annotation, vitalized with rest from a tiresome struggle. Well, what I suggest that you always do is push the rewind button and go backwards, yellow, or the fast forward button and go forward, green. If you check the line before and the line afterwards, you can kind of see it in the context of that stanza. Before long, you enjoy freedom one. So the clue is that you're winning freedom, that you're vitalized with rest from tiresome struggle. So whatever doing, we've been doing it for a long time. You leave behind your chrysalis husk. So from this context, it's the red and the yellow that's going to help me. Enjoying some freedom that you won and you're vitalized with rest. So I know that when I'm able to rest from a tiresome struggle, that's a positive thing. And so I want to look for something that means something positive. So let's look at our answer choices. We're not going to look it up in our dictionary. To change my form, that's a neutral term. To move to a new place, that's neutral, not positive or negative. To praise or to be admired. Well, in the context, I don't think that we're praising or admiring the butterfly because we're saying that it's vitalized after its journey. So apparently, the positive one that we were looking for is that it's given strength or energy because of its rest from the journey. So vitalized. So, how can I get some support for that? Prove it to me. Where's my evidence? And what is the evidence? Which word? How do I get an answer that would work here? Um, it would probably one, if I'm vitalized, I won my battle with the trip. And that is in the previous line, as I mentioned, that you just have to back up one line. That if you look up, if you say freedom, well, they weren't in a prison, they weren't locked up, they weren't stuck somewhere. Um, they were just on a journey, and so I would probably say that that would be an answer that I could eliminate. Um, Rest to give strength or energy. to rest from your rest. I don't think that word is going to be enough. If you look at the line itself, you vitalized with rest from tiresome struggle. Um, Basically, this vitalized is a reaction to this action that you've enjoyed. Before long, you enjoy your freedom won. So that's something that has happened, and then you become vitalized. Because that's the reaction, I think it's more the connection to the word one that would be the correct answer, not the word rest. And I can see how um, this could be a distraction um, because something that you've won is an action, something you're vitalized, that's an action, and rest uh, is in the context of the sentence. It says vitalize with rest. That's a noun. So since you want to use similar parts of speech, something that I won and it makes me vitalized are kind of two ideas that kind of coincide with each other. And so question two, if we mark our little tallies, was a two-part answer. And the good thing about this difficult answer is even if they struggle with the second part like we did, as long as they get the first part correct, part A, then they would get 1 point. The problem is if they were to choose letter B in part B, but they chose a different letter in part A, then the rules of the grading state that they wouldn't be able to get any points. And so what I've been doing is separating these questions because sometimes the programs that we use, they can't differentiate between uh, a part A and a part B question. So I'm going to be putting them in when I put them online for you, I'll be putting this as question number 2, part A, and question number 3, part B, and that way you can see if the students gets A correct, then you can go ahead and look at part B, which in my online tests would be question number 3 in this case. Okay. All right. Thanks for your patience. I just want to make sure I take my time and work through this. Next, what type of question is number 3? It says question 3. And there's just a little box and there's nothing dropped down. So that is called, number 3 is called text entry, where they either enter a string of text, meaning it could be a whole sentence, or just a number, a word, or a phrase. What are they asking for here? And number 3, they're just asking for a word. The poet uses first person point of view in this poem. So the students would actually have to type that because there's nothing that's gonna pop down. It's sort of like open-ended, but the answer, it's gonna be pretty hard. You either write first, second, or third person. And so a little guide for those of you who haven't watched me teach first, second, and third person, because of the word I that you see, several times. You make a little circle around it, and so you can say, oh, that's my eyeball. So when I point to my eye, I point with one finger. So I will be first person I, and then if you flip your fingers down, you can see an M. So if it says I or me, or if I flip my fingers up, I can say we. Anytime you see the pronouns I, we, or me, then we're talking about first person. So that's your clue. And so number 3, as you see there, is text entry. 6th grade. Number 4. This is the short answer where it's worth 2 points. So I'm going to go over here to number 4 on my advanced ELAR writing folder. And so it shows you here's the short constructed response. What is the question, or what is the topic? Red light. What is or are the answers? Red light. Because I need to make sure they understand that I only get 1 point, but my answer, red light, has to relate to the question or topic being asked about. And so how do you get a 1? How do you get a 2? You either tell where the answer is, or you give the evidence with or without quotation marks, or you can do both. Because as you see in the answer choices of all the samples, sometimes they tell you where, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just give the evidence, sometimes they paraphrase the evidence. Sometimes they use exact words and put quotation marks. It doesn't matter, apparently, as long as you do one or more of these 3 things. But I highly suggest that you write your answer in complete sentences. Okay, so this is the first time I want to use this. A complete sentence means that you start a sentence with a capital, and the editing rules say underline capitals and first words, that you slow down and push shift, which will change the size and the shape of the letter, the first letter in the sentence. You'll go until you have a subject, the person, place, thing, idea, people, places, things, ideas, has a subject and a predicate, which is either in past, present, or future tense. Then you'll push whoa. You'll have a stop sign with a period, exclamation, or a question mark. Or if you slow down anywhere in the sentence, you can put a comma, a colon, a semicolon, an apostrophe, or if you're going to be using quotation marks, you slow the sentence down to put those in there. Okay. When you're done, hopefully, you can use your dictionary, meaning the book online or paper, or your brain, to make sure that for the most part, your spelling is decipherable. And the last thing you can check is, I got to make sure that I don't have a run on, and that I don't have a fragment, that I don't give the reader whiplash by making them crash into a wall called a period, an exclamation, or question mark, where we call those ROFs, where we have a run-on problem or a fragment problem. That's known as a sentence boundary issue. So that's something that you want to make sure you teach your kids to do when they start writing incomplete sentences. So I would love the answer in a complete sentence, and I would love to know either where the answer is or the evidence, uh, with or without quotation marks. So what I've done is I've written the answer that they gave us in the sample answer key, my answer being in red, red light, 1 point, and my evidence being in yellow. So here we go. Let's check out the question. What is the most likely, what is the word, but whenever you see this word right here, reason, the W they're asking is why? Why does the poet rhyme the first and last lines? Okay, so that's compound, not just the first one, but the last line as well of each stanza. Okay, the stanza is sort of like a paragraph without indentions. So once you tell me your reason, red light, they would like to know the yellow light. So how do I get a two? Let's check it out. The poet uses rhyme, and I'm going to put the word wow. What original words, where am I getting that from? Right here on the folder. When I'm answering any question in a complete sentence, what original words from the question or the topic can I use? What other words can I use? In other words, synonyms. What original way could I write my answer? In other words, you don't have to write it with a certain part of speech first. You don't have to ask a question about the question first. Those are all formulaic things. We want to sometimes teach our middle to higher kids the wow, what original way could I respond with? So let's see. The poet uses rhyme at the beginning and end of each stanza, exact words, to show each stanza, repetition, is an important chapter in the monarch's life. And so as they move to a new chapter, they say, okay, why don't we go ahead and emphasize these new chapters by starting the first line with a rhyme and ending the last line with a rhyme. An example of this appears in the line, but someday I will meet your kin and like this one clung to the limb. Okay, so someday, meaning in the future, in a different chapter of the monarch butterfly's life, that this is going to happen. Okay, and so if I were to guess, the word limb is going to have a rhyming word that goes with it. So let me look for it. I would be surprised if they don't use it. There it is. Okay. But someday I will meet your kin. There's the first line. Line 26, kin. And like this one clung to its limb. Now, some people are going to be technical and say, hey, those don't rhyme. Limb, Jim, him. But the poet took a license here and just got similar to the ending, not exact rhyming. And sometimes that bothers me that they use examples like that because they could have picked one like grace and place or go and Mexico or sun and one, gust and rust, spring and sings. But that's another one where they end the same, but this one has an S and this one doesn't. And so sometimes those little distractors can throw your kids off. So how do I get the 2 points for question number 4? Answer the question and then give evidence. And so I want you to notice that the location of the text is not mentioned. It doesn't say which stanza this is. Okay. It doesn't say the last stanza, and it could have done that. But the quotations and the phrase example of this appears in lines, in the lines, but as you notice, it doesn't even say the lines and it doesn't say the stanza. to guide the reader to the supporting evidence. So basically, it tells you, hey, you're going to find these exact words. Um, Example of this, when they said that, that's kind of guiding them to the actual text that they're going to be using the first and the last line of the last stanza. I just felt like I needed to add another way because there's always more than one way to answer a question. Other ways to express the answer, uh, a new chapter. Okay. Since a new chapter could be one way of saying it, what do they mean by that? In each stanza, a different way could be transitions to new events instead of new chapters, or different experiences in the sequence of the monarch's life. Because those mean the same thing as a different chapter, uh, a, an order of the sequence, a transition, any of those answers right there in red would also qualify for the first point being the answer. Number 5 has 2 correct answers. So if I go over here, multi-select, I'm going to put my second number next to multi-select, meaning that there's more than one correct answer to a question. Use the story behind the Silmarillion to answer the following question. And these are 2 articles, this being one of them, an article about um, something that was started by J.R. Tolkien but not finished, based on the information in paragraph 4 and 5. That's the where of the story behind the Silmarillion. What can the reader infer about the J.R. Tolkien's son, Christopher? Okay, so I'm going to make a little stick man. That's our character. And so because you can't draw a stick man on the test, you need to make sure your kids have blank paper and that they would be able to write number 5 on a piece of paper, and they could draw the stick man and they would write Christopher either inside or next to what about Christopher? Um, Nothing. It just says, what can you infer about him? So something about his character or his personality. And so for those of you in the Crest online training, the other day I sent you something, one page that just really allows you to do an in-depth focus on each character. And in this case, it would be Christopher. Everything you can about him, his attitude, his actions, his demeanor, how he feels, his state of being, state of mind, because so many of the questions that I noticed in constructed, short answer, and extended essay, and even regular multiple choice were based on characters. I felt like it was important to send you that document. So make sure those of you who are in the CREST training use the page called Understanding Characters, and then let's find out what we understand about our character. He had previous experience writing fiction. No, because we find out in the paragraph that this was his foundational experience. So if we look just at paragraphs uh, 5 and 6, where is the story behind? Oh, don't tell me I forgot to give it to you guys. Um, Oh, it's after the fact. All right. So paragraphs 5 and 6, the passage, this one comes after it. And so I'll draw a little wall there. I just wanted to save some space by um, squeezing it in there so I didn't have an extra page. So if we look at paragraphs 5 and 6, um, the important thing is to say, okay, if I'm supposed to make an inference and to infer means to read between the lines. And so let's see if we can figure out a little bit of information about this son of J.R. Tolkien just from paragraphs 5 and 6. Let me click on autofocus to make sure that's as clear as possible for you. The published version of the Silmarillion has 5 parts. That's not about Christopher, but which was what Tolkien wanted, but the parts had not been put together as a whole when Christopher took on the work after his father died. Okay, so Christopher began the work. So what I want to highlight is anything that has to do with Christopher. Some stories required organization, and other parts were still incomplete and finished needed and needed finishing. Okay. All I know so far about Christopher is that he apparently is willing to take on something that's first possibly a difficult task because the task required organization and it required working on things that were incomplete and needed finishing. Let's see if we can find out anything else about this Christopher dude. The Silmarillion was published in 1977 to mixed reviews. In other words, some positive, some negative. And so your students could write the words in their notes for this question, positive being up and negative being down. Some people believed it was too different from what they had come to expect from Tolkien's writing. That's not about Christopher. It had a grim mood and complicated plot. Nothing about Christopher. Others were impressed with the masterful editing of the Tolkien has done. Okay. Opinion. Masterful editing. Masterful is a positive opinion. They knew that Christopher had started the task with many incomplete pieces. And so, just like I told you earlier, anybody who's willing to take on a task that's not finished, it's like grabbing somebody else's puzzle that they started and having no idea um, what their intentions were, what their plan was. You kind of have, it's sort of like finishing the puzzle without the outside of the box. Christopher published more of his father's unfinished writings. So once he did that, he didn't just stop, he kept going, including a children's story and a poem about King Arthur. So these things that he was able to accomplish, they allowed still more of his fantasies to be shared with devoted readers. So he finished several of his father's writings. So let's see which 2 answers we could remember because it's the best 2 answers on there. Oops, gotta go before. I was trying to save some space. Okay. He had previous experience. No, because he took on his dad's work. He respected his father's wishes regarding the writing. It was basically, they said that was the way his father wanted it. Christopher was unaffected by the criticism. Well, he got mixed reviews, but you can tell there, even though people didn't like the original, some of them didn't like the original uh, finishing of the Silmarillion. Sorry for the pronunciation. He went on to produce 2 more documents, and so you can say probably that would be the answer. And again, what is the answer? Red light, red light. And so if there are two answers, it's sort of like, I want you to look at um, my engine. If I ask a question that has two answers, then I have two eyeballs on this train. And so the answer needs to be two. If I don't answer either one, then I get 0 points. If I answer both, I can get 2 points because constructed responses, if you look up here, constructed responses are always going to be either worth 1 point or in this case, 2 points. So there's your two answers. Let's see what the other ones say about him. That he published some of his unfinished writings to make money. Because of that detail, this phrase right here, since nothing was mentioned about income, I can't infer that there was money made. I can infer that the criticism didn't bother him because he kept making more of his father's unfinished work. Let's see the last one. He blamed his friend for the mixed reviews. He makes no reference to his friend at all who helped him get started in those last two paragraphs. And so, since it wasn't even there, the friend was a character that's not even in the last paragraph, and because of the word blame being a negative connotation, something that you do when things are not going your way is to blame other people. That would not make sense. Okay, let's continue on. So, what I want you to notice here, this is an informative genre, and it's in sort of a mini paired passage format where they have a little selection, little article about George Washington's portrait right there. That's the picture that you see on the dollar coin. And as you can see, it's an unfinished portrait for some reason. They were not allowed or given the time to finish. And we'll read about it if the questions ask us. And that one has 5 paragraphs. And the story behind the Silmarillion, which is something that J.R. Tolkien um, wrote, just so that you can know a little bit more about him. People are familiar with The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but they might not be familiar uh, with uh, his book, uh, The Silmarillion, perhaps because of his death in 1973. Okay, all right, let's see our next type of answer choice. Use George Washington's portrait to answer the following questions. And so again, what we have here is a box. And since you can see there's not a drop down, what that's called is box number 2. This is question number 6, that text entry. They want us to put a string of text, such as a number, a word, or a phrase. Again, it would help if you laminate these. That way your kids can use a dry erase, wet erase, or a permanent marker. And then, of course, use something to get it off every time they're making a new test so they can see which types of constructed responses are we practicing, which type of, are we doing short answer or are we doing extended questions? Because there is a difference in terms of what you have to do. So let's see the question. Use George Washington's portrait to answer the following question. Read the sentence from paragraph 2 of George Washington's portrait. Okay, so this is just one sentence. So sometimes when you ask your kids, well, read the entire uh, article, that might be too much endurance for them. Read an entire paragraph, number 2, that might be too much endurance for some kids. But if you only ask them to read a line, that would be something that you would tell your kids, look for answers that require less work in terms of understanding content. So let's see if we can figure out the answer to this question without having to go to paragraph 2 or to the entire article. But instead of making his subject sit perfectly still, okay, this is the guy who drew George Washington's portrait, as was commonly practiced at the time, Stuart, he's the artist, engaged them in interesting conversation. So when you engage, if this is my wedding ring, and it is, that is my left hand. So that's my personal hand. My professional hand is the hand where I don't wear an engagement ring or a wedding ring. And so if I engage with you, I connect with you. And so what he's saying is to kind of help the person relax, he engaged, he connected to them with interesting conversation. Now, interesting is an opinion, so I would suggest that you highlight the word interesting, and you could put an O uh, representing opinion, and it's a positive opinion. Now, it's important to understand that from whose point of view does the conversation have to be interesting? Well, since we're talking about George Washington and painting his portrait, probably it's going to have to be interesting conversation talking about things that he likes. So, not that Stuart likes, so Stuart has to pay attention. So, how do you engage them? How do you connect them? In this sentence, the word interesting provides a clue to the word engaged. So if I engage you, if I connect you, instead of disconnect, when you're engaged in relationships, you're being, you've been proposed to by one person, and you stay engaged until you either break up or until you, in some cases, get married. And unfortunately, when I ask teachers in my trainings, how many of you are married? More than half will raise their hand. And I say, how many of you are engaged? And none of those people that raised their hand that they were married raised their hand that they were engaged. And I want to say this as a TMI, a teachable moment of instruction or a teachable moment of intervention. You should not stop being engaged just because you got married. The engagement, the connection, the heart. Let me show you on my folder. The heart and the head connection, the engagement should continue well on. And so, how did he engage? He connected to things that their heart likes, to things that their head likes, the things that they like to think about. So, because it was conversation, to things they don't mind talking about. And so, if you look down here at my toes, down by the toes, it says voice and spice. There's a saying, don't judge a person until you've walked a mile in his shoes. Inside his shoes are his toes, which are his voice, and I'm going to call that the spice to the selection. And real quick, toes, what's the topic? Are there any truisms or quotes or words of wisdom that help you understand and connect? Is there a theme? Is there a message you can take away? Are there any opinions or thoughts, things inside the character's singular or plural head? Are there any emotions, things, the way that the character or characters feel by telling with words or showing with their actions? Are we able to use imagery by the senses to establish a setting? Or in this case of this question, what are they saying? What are they talking about? And the last one to have voice is hopefully there's some vocabulary that's higher that we're reading or when we're writing, and figurative language. So that's my acronym for TOES, because a lot of times when you're reading poems or plays or fictional stories or literary nonfiction stories, we're going to learn a lot of these things about the characters and who they are. Okay, so the answer, the best one, would be the word interesting. And because all of these words could be used, it doesn't necessarily have to be interesting. Engage them in conversation. Well, it said in the answer choices that conversation could have been the word that was typed. And so if I talk with you, will I engage? Will I connect? Yes. If one person talks and the other one is hopefully talking back, that's an engaged conversation. But the communication would hopefully have to go both ways, because if you're a teacher and you're the one talking, but your students are not listening to you and they're not looking, more than likely they're not going to respond and not going to interact. They won't be engaged because your conversation is just one way and it's not interesting. And so conversation is usually dialogue, okay? And I'm going to look real quick to see if they give any examples. They didn't. All they said was that George Washington liked horses, and so if they did have actual dialogue, instead of just a mouth, you could draw opening and closing quotation marks before and after they talk. And what were they talking about? What was the topic? Horses, because George Washington loved horses. Stewart knew, if I talk about horses, that will be interesting to him. And so either of those two answers would be acceptable. And again, whenever it's a text box, um, I would imagine that the computer can recognize simple words like that. Hopefully, we won't have to have a human being uh, checking to see if there's probably going to be what's called a word bank. And as long as the word that they choose is inside the word bank, then it will be an acceptable response. That's how that tends to work. All right, number 7. Thanks for your patience. A two-part. So remember, in my online testing, if this was number 7, I would separate it into two different questions to make sure you have to remember that if 7 is part A, 8 would be part B. If they do not get question 7 right, part A, then you cannot give them credit because it does say number 7 is number 7 in my folder, that the answer to part B is dependent on part A. And so the points that you can earn on part B is dependent on getting part A correct. So let's see. Again, that's worth 2 points. And I'm going to write that right there. So sometimes there's just more than one answer. And so as long as I get one or both right, I'll get 1 or 2 points. This one works where I have to get this one correct. So basically, this is usually the first part is what is the answer to the question? And then the second part is how can you prove it? Either give me the location and the evidence, or at least give me the evidence. Let me show you how that works. Use the portrait to answer the following question, the one about George Washington. Which statement best expresses the key idea of paragraph 2? You would highlight paragraph 2 in the article George Washington's portrait, underline some titles or highlight it. That Stuart wanted to paint more well-known figures than any other artist. That Stuart ignored rules that portrait painters followed in the day. I don't think he ignored them, and we'll read paragraph 2 just so you can see. He just kind of tweaked the rules to make sure that his audience, whoever his person he was drawing, was able to stay focused on him the entire time of the portrait. Stuart helped his subjects relax in order to achieve a realistic likeness. Okay, so if we understand what happened just before in the previous question, how was he helping George Washington relax? He engaged him in conversation about horses to achieve a realistic likeness. So I'm going to have to look for that answer. Stuart gained success because of the number of paintings he produced. So the number of paintings, when you gain success, you become popular. What does success mean to you? Okay, either that you're popular or possibly that you're rich. So we're going to look for something about that. Okay. What was he doing here? He's helping them relax. Why? To get a realistic likeness. Ignoring rules would be the key words. And he only wants to paint action who? Well-known figures, the subject. Okay, so let's look at paragraph 2 and see if we can infer or actually see something about this guy. He was a painter who lived in from 1755 to 1828. He was known for both his talents as a painter and his charm as a person. Okay, two qualities. He's talented. Okay, he painted the portraits of approximately 1,000 people during his lifetime. Does it say he only wants well-known? Let's find out. Many distinguishing famous people sat for a portrait for him. Did it say that he preferred them? No. It just happened to be that some of them were famous. Instead of making his subjects sit perfectly still, as was commonly practiced, he engaged them in interesting conversation. He wanted his subject to feel at ease. Here we go. So if I think of the word at ease, that's a synonym to be easy, to be relaxed, to be calm, to capture their most natural expression and pose. And so all the students had to do was rephrase this line in paragraph 2, and they would have been able to figure out that it was the same thing as helping them relax to get a realistic likeness. So the pose would look like the person. Okay, prove it. He encouraged lively discussions. Okay, that was the thing that he did with uh, George Washington in question number 6. And I don't really like the fact that um, the questions are sort of repetitious. They just use different words. Make sure your students pay attention to that. Lively is interesting, and a discussion is a conversation. So when your students are reading, make sure they understand uh, that they're using synonyms that have already been established in other places. Interesting conversations, lively discussions. They were usually asked to stay very still. Um, that wouldn't connect to them relaxing. If I have to stay very still, he he didn't do that. He did the opposite of that. He painted about 1,000 people. Okay, that was true. And so, if your students are just looking for something that's true, then they could pick that. But they said best supports the answer. Which one proves a way that he helps his subject relax? He encouraged discussion with his clients. This is what, and this is how he did it. So you have to turn that answer that's true into an answer that's false because it was supposed to support answer A. Sitters for Stuart's painting were famous and important. Yes, some of them were, but that wasn't the proof that he was relaxing. Because they were famous and important people, they would relax and or he would help them relax. No, he helped people relax by encouraging lively discussions so that he could get this effect. He would do this cause. Hey, let me have the teeter totter, cause and effect. Let's have an interesting discussion with my clients. Why? So that we can get them to relax. That's the effect. And what's my next result? That they're going to have a realistic likeness. Okay. Number 8. You guys are so patient. Tell you what I'll do. I'll stop here. Actually, no, I'm going to keep going. If you can divide this into 3 or 4 parts, I want to just make sure that I connect this entire lesson in one video, and you can pause it whenever you need to and come back in. Um, that way you can really get a good picture of an entire test all in one place, the constructed responses, the short answer, and the extended essay. So here we have number 8. As you can see, it's got red and yellow. And so they're asking a short answer again. So number 8 is the red and yellow. What's my question or topic? What is the answer or what are the answers? And either where is my evidence or what is my evidence? with or without quotation marks, which means it could be the exact words, or it could be paraphrased, or it could be the exact words without quotation marks. So let's see um, how I get a 2, red light and yellow light, the 3 being the green light. So as you can see, it's got the red, the yellow outline on the Y, and the green for development, where you explain your examples and your evidence by GPSing, by getting pretty specific. And we'll see that in the next question. All right, let's take a look and see what the question says. Use George Washington's portrait, that 5 or 6 paragraph article. Read the question carefully, then then enter your answer in the box provided. Okay, so that you can remember in case you're not familiar. You're allowed 475 characters, not counting the spaces, but you do count the punctuation that does take up a spot. And so they don't count these spaces between words and or spaces between sentences. Okay. You don't need to write possible answer. You just need to write a possible answer. In paragraph 3, where paragraph 3, George Washington's portrait, what? Why does the author include the detail of Gilbert Stuart talking to George Washington about horses? Okay, and I already know why, because we find out that he has this way of getting them to relax by talking about things that are interesting to them. So let's see what the answer would look like. The author includes this detail as an example to show how Stuart would put his subjects at ease. That's what he did. What's the example? Example, George Washington loved talking about horses, so when Stuart talked with him about horses, repetition, I'm only using the answer they gave me in the answer document, Washington became more relaxed, and Stuart was able to paint a more realistic portrait of him. Okay, a couple of things to notice here. The evidence is a paraphrase from paragraph 3, number 1. It does not include the location and does not use quotation marks because it's a paraphrase. If you use the exact words, you still don't have to use quotation marks. This TA sample response shows that this is an acceptable way of answering a question and presenting, red light, and presenting supporting evidence, yellow light, in order to qualify for a 2. Remember that a short answer does not have to be explained. All you have to do is give me the answer and give me the evidence. You don't have to go into detail explaining. If your students do that, well, that's fine. But when you start explaining yourself, you're basically graduating from a short answer to extended essay response. So technically, as you can see here, um, a short answer is just that, a short answer. All you need is the answer in one sentence and the evidence in another sentence. So it could possibly have 2 sentences, or if the student could do it carefully, they could give you the answer and the evidence in one sentence, as long as both things are being mentioned. And so you would have to give them 2 points for that. And at the end of the PDF file uh, that I will send to all of you, it basically shows if the student used just the evidence but didn't answer the question, that would be a 1. Okay. If the student just answered the question but didn't give the evidence, it would be a 1. That's based on the sample that TEA showed on one of their new test design structures for English language arts. So it's important to know that similarly to the old style short answer in 9th and 10th grade, if the student A answers the question or B gives evidence, then they'll get 1 point. If they do both, the answer and the evidence, they'll get 2 points. So keep that in mind when you're marking your scores. Okay. Now, number 9, and I want you to notice that it has a 5-point bullet. So that's your kid's first clue that they're doing an extended essay response, because the highest score you can get is a 5 from 2 different readers. So 5 plus 5, 5 plus 5 is equal to 10. So if you think of this little rhyme, 1, 2, 3, 4 gets a good score. 2, 3, 4, 5 conventions thrive. In other words, you can only get the 5 if you've done the first 4 bullets and done that last part. So that's why my stick man doesn't just have what's my answer, called a central idea statement in elementary, controlling idea statement in middle school, and thesis statement in high school. How can I organize it? Where is my evidence in terms of the lines, scene or scenes, stanza or stanzas, sentence or sentences, section or sections, paragraph or paragraphs, or the evidence with or without quotation marks, exact words, or paraphrase. If I can do that, I get the 2. Then, in order to get the 3, you'll see in the rubric, you have to develop your ideas in detail. In other words, decide which examples of evidence. So if you think of the word evidence, I'm going to show you a cool little trick here. If I pick certain evidence, I can have quite a bit of evidence, but the more examples of evidence you use, the more difficult it's going to be to try and get to that 3, because your evidence from both selections in this case, in other words, it's a little mini paired passage, like I said. You have to answer the question from both selections. Okay. In other words, that's 2 ideas. So remember my train engine. That means I've got to give the evidence from both locations, from both selections, and I've got to develop. And so the evidence from the the we'll call it the story behind the Silmarillion, and I've got to give evidence from the portrait. Okay, both being unfinished. I've got to give examples from both, and in order to get a 3, I've got to explain both of them. And so keep in mind that if I only give evidence from one of the selections, then I haven't done the second bullet. Okay. If I don't explain from both selections, I haven't done the third bullet, where you say, I'm going to take some examples of the evidence and go ahead and explain how both passages tie together. And then I've got to make sure that my conventions in my response is strong, not perfect. Okay? So remember I said WWE. W, W, E. As long as your students can remember that, what is the question? And our question can be who, what, when, where, why, which, or how. Then you're going to say, where is the evidence? It's better to tell me where in each selection am I going to get the evidence? Where is my evidence from the story? And where is my evidence from the portrait? Okay. So this, in my opinion, was the most difficult sample that they could give. And so because in this case, the two articles were inside the same big selection, they might be giving you a clue that they're going to simplify uh, paired passages because it does say um, you need to use specific evidence from the articles plural. And let's see, bullet one, what's your controlling idea, sixth, seventh, and eighth graders? Or if you give a question like this to high school, it would be ninth or 10th graders being a thesis. Organize, which means your where and your evidence. Development of the evidence means your explanation and expression of your ideas. And then your four or five, when conventions thrive, your grammar and your content will be good. Because the last thing it says to do is to take your paper to the ER, to the emergency room of editing and revising. So as you can see here, I used, once again, red for the answer from each place, yellow for the evidence from each place, and green for the explanation of what I think the author intended in each place. Okay, so let's see what the question is. So the Silmarillion topic and the painting of George Washington were left incomplete by their creators. Both are widely known today. What do they mean by widely known? Either popular, seen by a lot of people. Explain how the painting, so this W is how. How, not starting with W, but ending, is the painting and the novel different in their journeys? And so remember that in a paired passage, it's sort of like, you can think of it this way, sort of like a pair of shoes. They're going to ask you some questions about George Washington's portrait. They'll ask you some questions about the story behind the Silmarillion. Then they'll ask you a couple of questions and they're going to say, let's take this inside lace here and tie it to the inside lace here. And we're going to tie these together and say, how do these either compare? How are they similar? Or in this case, how are they different? And they didn't take a journey, but there were different steps that these unfinished products took to becoming popular opinion and important opinion. All right, so let's see what the steps were. Tolkien died and never completed the Silmarillion. Stuart finished the most important part of his painting and made copies to sell because it was such a good representation of George Washington. So one guy died and didn't get to finish. Um, Stuart finished the most important part, the face, and made copies to sell because it was a good. So that's the difference. Uh, Tolkien died, but Stewart finished at least part of it. In other words, when I look at students and I look at teachers, the reason I can tell them apart is not from their arms, because we all have those, not from their body or their legs, because we all have those, but your face. And so the most important part of George Washington is his face, and you can look at a dollar bill and tell how it's different. So let me see some yellow. The Silmarillion was prepared by publishing by Tolkien's son and his friend, while opposite, Stuart's painting became famous just for the portion that was completed. Okay, so somebody else had to finish this one. As mentioned in paragraph 5, now I'm turning green by trying to explain a little bit of George Washington's portrait. George Washington was considered a great man, that was mentioned in the evidence, by the standards of that time period, and at least whatever was meant back then. That's using my own words. And many felt that the portrait did an amazing job, my own words, of capturing the essence of all the excellence that he stood for in life. Again, my own words. He was a great person, and that was my interpretation of what a great person is like. His portrait was the source of perhaps the most used piece of paper in the United States today, the dollar bill. In other words, that painting, that portrait of George Washington's face, is the one that's used on probably the most used piece of paper. Why am I saying the most used piece of paper? Well, a dollar bill gets used over and over by different people, and because we're not all rich, the 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 bills that are paper are $1 bills, fives, tens, 20s, 50s, and hundreds. Well, because of people being poor and not a lot of people being rich, you're going to probably come across a lot more ones in your life. And so that's why I use my own words there. Let me continue. Not very many people can say that there are figures featured on our natural currency. Again, that's my own interpretation, giving more details about the money and how that's different. Okay, so now I've got to come back and use a little bit of text from the Tolkien project. The completion of the Silmarillion took Tolkien's son Christopher and his friend almost a year. Uh, so I have a grammar mistake right there. And remember, the conventions have to be strong, not perfect. So if you're just missing one word like that, I didn't do that on purpose. I did that by accident. But if you're just missing a word, they're not going to take away the 5 because it just has to be strong in conventions. If you look at the last page of the PDF file, you'll see that. When the Sil, and I spelled it wrong there, the Silmarillion was published in 1977, and you can see that I do have an understanding of it. Some didn't like it, that was evidence, but others were extremely impressed by their ability to put together so many incomplete pieces with masterful editing. All of that was written, so I use that as evidence. Okay, and I am explaining, but I'm actually using evidence here. This work was the training and critical foundation, my own words, that Christopher needed to become a best-selling author mentioned in the passage, as mentioned in paragraph 4 of the story behind the Silmarillion. And closing. I'm not saying that you have to have one, but I think it's a good idea if you think of your thesis as your central controlling idea, or thesis, my thesis, then your examples and your evidence, in this case, we need 2 different passages in order to get 2s and 3s from 2 different readers. Uh, the bottom of the stick man has laces and shoes. And so I went ahead and put in there closure. It's always good to have something that ties everything together, such as your topic, your idea, the central controlling idea or thesis, the evidence, the examples that you use from the evidence, the way you explain it, and the way you provide specific support to that evidence. If all that works and you bring closure that ties everything together, you have a good chance of getting that 3. And so what I sometimes tell teachers and students is if your paper is between a 1 and a 2, a good closing might move it to a 2. If it's between a 2 and a 3, a good closing might move it to a 3. So here's how I closed. These 2 wonderful achievements show that anything in life, even a work in progress, can become an incredible masterpiece with the right time, attention, and as in these 2 examples, the right people. So why did I say that? Because up here in the topic, they said they became popular and important. And so I needed positive words or phrases to connect the process of saying, okay, even though they had different journeys, they both ended up being popular and important in the end. And so they were both uh, wonderful achievements, opinion, that anything in life, even a work that's in progress, things that are not completed, as in both of those things, can become an incredible masterpiece with the right time, attention, and in these 2 examples, the right people. That's my closure. And so hopefully you would say this is a 2-3 response. No, you do not need to use the entire 2,300 characters allotted to extended essay responses. Without spaces, it came up to 1,251. That's the official count. If you count the spaces, it's 1,494. And all I did was I copied using the program that I designed this test with, copied the entire response, went into Microsoft Word, and then you can click review on the top of Microsoft Word, and it allows you to see a word count either with or without spaces. So that's something you can do in case you're not familiar with that. So I know that you've been watching for a while, or hopefully you've been watching this in parts, but I do want to show you a few more responses. So question number, what was that question? That was number 9. And number 9 was worth 5 points from 2 different readers. And I'm really trying to help those of you who are grasping for straws at an understanding of this new test by going into great detail for you. This is probably going to be one of the longest videos that I've done for uh, this new test, whether it's CREST or just for you regular teachers that are just wanting some guidance. Revising. It's improving the content. Okay. So when you see up there in the passage, in the directions, you're going to look and it's going to always say the word revisions. When you revision something, it's going to look different now, the way it is right there, than it will later. So later, the content is going to improve because revision means to do what's called ARM. Not arms as in substitute, because they never use the word substitute on a Texas STAR test. They use either add, remove, replace, or move. Sometimes you can use the word delete, but delete is a synonym of remove, and you just don't put anything back in. You're just taking something out. So let's see our examples. What is this? Number 10. This is called an inline choice, a drop-down menu. So where's that at? Inline choice, number 10. Select the answer from a drop-down menu. And so you can see those are my choices. Gabi has not used the most effective transition in sentence 6. Okay, so if this is sentence 6, I'm going to make a T right here. And this means that when I move from sentence 5 to sentence 6, I want to see what teeter-totter transition I can use to go from sentence 5. It says, select the phrase that should replace, and so I need to remove addition and replace it with one of those. So all I have to do is highlight sentences 5 and 6 in the passage, highlighting, and I'll go ahead and I'm going to use red. If you can't use red, of course, they do give you yellow. And so if your online test doesn't have red, then of course you use yellow because red means stop and yellow means, hey, slow down. So there they are together. Let's start with a brief history of spoons. In addition, well, in addition means here's some more. If you haven't even started yet, then you wouldn't use the phrase in addition. So what I'd recommend, most of you received a hard copy of my transition words and phrases. Some of you received a digital copy of the binder, and on page 251 and 252, you'll see 100 or more transition words and phrases. So since we're barely getting started with the history of spoons, I've got to pick a word or phrase that means I'm going to start by telling you that spoons didn't always look the way they do today. Due to this fact, well, that means that I've already told you something. And since I haven't told you anything yet, I can't use that phrase. First of all, yeah, I haven't told you anything yet. Spoons didn't always look the way they do today. That makes sense. In summary, no. In summary is in conclusion, I'm already done telling you stuff and I haven't even started talking to you. Above all, well, you could say above all, but above all means you've already told me everything and you're about to tell me one more thing that's maybe the most important above all, higher than anything else, more important than anything else. Well, since I don't have anything else, the best one would be first of all. And I want you to notice they do have a comma there. And so this is called an introductory phrase. First of all, comma, capital, first of all, comma, spoons did not always look the way they do today, period. Okay? So even though I'm practicing content, I still want to take a look and see how are the sentences written correctly with cups, a capital at the beginning, a subject and a predicate, and a punctuation mark at the end. What is my punctuation at the end? The stop sign is called a period. So if you write this sentence, the saying down, that every sentence is like a street that you pave with a subject, spoons, and a predicate, didn't always look, and then a stop sign. Okay, so it's a street that you pave. We have a subject, we have a predicate, which is the action or the verb, and then there's an ending. Every sentence must have an ending, a stop sign of some sort. So hopefully your students don't have highways or expressways. They just have streets where every sentence is like a street. Um, 3 more revising. Thanks for your patience on this. I feel like it's important that I go into depth for you so that you can see before. Let's go from the known, what they give us, to the unknown. What do these things look like? Number 11. This is because you don't see a drop down response. This is called text entry. And so that's going to be number 11. So it'll be the third time a string of text. So in this case, it's going to be actually 2 sentences. And even though it's 2 sentences, this says 475, but I was told by the director of reading of TEA that all editing and revising would only be worth 1 point, even though there are 2 sentences. And perhaps it's because these 2 sentences are being combined into one. So it says, Gabby wants to combine, come together right now. The ideas in sentences 19 and 20. So we're going to grab them and put them together without changing the meaning or the content. A couple of things to think about when you're combining sentences. Get rid of anything that's a run-on, a fragment that has a comma conjunction issue, anything that has too much repetition, anything that changes the meaning or the content, if it changes the cause and effect relationship or the compare and contrast, if there's errors in any of those, even though those are a lot of conventions things, you cannot choose an editing selection if, sorry, a revising selection if they end up having one of these sentence boundary issues. So let's take a look. This is how it was before. Remember, I talked to you about the now and the later. And because it is open-ended, it allows your students some flexibility. And what we're going to do is get rid of the 2 sentences. There's nothing wrong with them, but it says in a clear and effective way. So let's see. For this reason, comma, introductory phrase, King Louis the 14th signed a decree in 1669, period. Capital. It, the degree, banned most knives from the table, period. And because that sentence was kind of vague from the table, yes, the sentences before were talking about people kind of eating together. Sentences, what is that? Sentences 19 and 20. There they are. They would, the knives were expensive, so it was common for dinner guests to bring their knives to dinner to cut and spear their food. Okay, so to dinner is to from the table, not when they're going to battle, but when they're getting ready just to eat food. So what would take this second part that's a little bit too vague and make it more specific in the context and the content that was written before? For this reason, same, comma, introductory phrase, King Louis the 14th signed a decree in 1669 that banned most knives from dining room tables, more specific, during meals. Where? From dining room tables. When? During the meals. So since that does combine them, then either a human or a computer is going to have to determine, are there enough word content here that are similar that does combine it in a clear and more effective way? In my mind, I say yes. Okay, got 4 more questions and we will finish. And I hope I would love for you guys to post something positive, something you were able to take away from this explanation, this very, very in-depth explanation of the entire 6th grade test. And I'm going to do this same thing for 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. And that way you guys can get an idea. Like I said, let's get really strong at going from the known, what they've given us already in constructed, short answer, extended, editing, and revising to the unknown. And if you go to the other portion of the sample items, you'll get regular multiple choice practice, which I can help you with that as well. But the lack of clarity is coming from parts 3, 4, and 5 of my CREST training. The CREST being the CR, the constructed response, which is this type here, the extended essay editing, which is coming up in the next page, the revising, the R of CREST, which is what we're on right now, and the ST, the short textual responses that are worth 2 points. Okay. All right. So again, this is number 12. What kind of a constructor response? Because you can see that there's a drop down menu, we will place a 12 next to inline choices, select answers from a drop-down menu. And for those of you who have the reading and writing folder, anything above the red line is specifically for reading and writing related questions. If it's below the red line, it can also be included on math, social studies, science, algebra, biology questions. So just be aware of that, that all of the subjects are going to get some constructed type responses, and so it's important that your students practice those. Okay. All right, so let's see. Improving the content. The word junction, joining together of something, is not the most appropriate word. So I'm going to take out one word and replace it with another one. In sentence 25, select the word that should replace junction. So here's the sentence. Some restaurants and cafeterias offer sporks, comma, and sometimes commas are used to allow a phrase that gives you more information about what was just written. What is a spork? It's a combination of the spoon and fork for convenience. Okay, so a junction meaning a coming together. So since junction is where 2 words come together, 2 roads come together, where they join, that's not really what they meant there. It's sort of a spork is what students see a lot of times in a cafeteria. And what I'm doing here is I'm drawing my memory of one. So it's sort of like a spoon because of the closed part right here. And so what I just did right there is another version of arm, but with an S. Sometimes you can think artists remember more setting, senses. What does it look like? Basically, I'm using imagery. I'm letting my brain write down what our school cafeteria offers: a combination of a spoon and a fork. A solution? No, there wasn't a problem. A cooperation? I don't think that spoons and forks can cooperate with each other since they're inanimate objects, they're things, not people or animals. The division a division of the spoon and the fork. No, it's basically a putting them together. And so combining them is what was being done there. That would be the best choice for number 12. 13, sentence 27 needs to be revised. So as soon as you just see the word revise, all they usually mean is you're just going to change the order or the organization of the sentence without changing the meaning or the content. It just means that it's too vague or the order didn't make sense. Rewrite the sentence 27 in a clear and effective way. Here's the before, the right now, and here is the later. One way that you could do this. Okay? You're changing the order of the words without changing the meaning of the content. In 2003, comma, that's an introductory phrase saying when. That comma is optional because it's a short comma. In other words, your students could possibly see in 2003, Joachim Nordwall. The comma does not have to be there because it's just a when statement that is short. In other words, if it has one word, two words, or three words, those short introductory phrases are what we call optional commas. Developed an eating utensil that has a fork on one end and a spoon on the opposite end, period. I would probably not want to repeat. These devices, this is the one that we're trying to improve the content of, so it's always best to read the sentence before, comma, who have bought over 20 million of them since a device, which is the spoon and the fork, is not a who, it's a what. I can already tell the sentence doesn't make sense that way. Who have bought over 20 million of them, comma. So you're not telling more about the people, you're talking more about the devices. So we have to figure out how to get our popular with campers because the devices are the ones that are popular. The campers are not popular. So what's the best way to change the order? These devices are popular with campers, comma, who have bought over 20 million of them. So again, whenever you have something that's mentioned followed by a comma, if that following phrase is telling you some adding support, explaining more about something or someone, in this case, some people, the campers, what about them? They've bought 20 million of them. That would be the best change. And so again, this number 13 is I'm going to make sure that one is a text entry. So for the fourth time, a text entry response uh, was required. And do you feel like it's overwhelming? No, all they're doing is writing the sentence that's already there because you don't change content. You just add something, remove something, replace something, or move the content around. And so I just had to change the order of the words so that they made more sense. So the students would get 1 point for that one, for that revising. And then all we have left now is 2 editing questions. And I have to congratulate you. If you are a person that stuck through this entire video, watching every single lesson and every single question, I really admire you because I was going to stop myself. All right. So when you look at the directions up on top, the italicized portion, they'll either be italicized or it'll be regular straight up print. I was writing a paper about joining the school orchestra. Read the paragraphs from the beginning of his paper, so it's only the beginning of the paper, and look for corrections. And so instead of the word revisions, it uses the word corrections. And so as soon as your students see the word corrections, they would write cups that I need to find a mistake in capitalization, usage, punctuation, or spelling. If the question says error or change, or I would use sentence boundaries such as run-ons or fragments if the question says correct, just corrections, or write this corrections for two sentences, or how to write the sentence, how to write a sentence, one sentence correctly. If it doesn't use the word error or the word change, then that's usually a sign of a run-on or a fragment of some kind. So let's take a look. Again, it's only got 8 sentences. They're always going to be shorter. I'm hoping that the word editing will be written on top of the 2 passages that are conventions, and revising will be written on top of the 2 that are content. All right. Javier has made an error. So as soon as you see the word error, your kids can usually write cups. Why am I saying that? Because my final version of the ELAR folder says, rule 1 says if I see the word error or the word change, it normally means it's a mistake of cups, capitalization, usage, punctuation, or spelling. So let's take a look and see which mistake it is. Sentence 2 says, when blank encouraged me to play a sport or participate in the school band instead. So let's see what it says in sentence 2. First, you want to look and see the way that it was already written. So you would highlight sentence 2, since we are not allowed to annotate, capital. When my friends heard the news, so when my friends heard the news, because that's a dependent clause, not just an introductory phrase, and it does have a subject, friends, and a predicate, heard the news. You need a comma once the dependent clause is finished. And so watch, I'm going to put a capital D, lowercase c, comma. Then I need an introductory clause. In dependent clause, I have a lowercase I followed by a period, an exclamation, or a question mark. So that is called a complex sentence. All right. So what we're looking for is the answer choice that places a comma right there. So that's a P, a punctuation mistake to separate a dependent clause from an independent clause with a comma, also known as a complex sentence when you have a dependent clause and an independent clause inside the same sentence. So let's look and see which one did it correctly. When my friends heard the news, comma, which one is it? When my friends, comma, no. When my friends, I need to finish the thought, heard the news, comma. Since that one did it in the wrong place, I would not select it. When my friends heard, no, they heard the news. When my friends heard the news, yes. When my friends heard the news, they comma. So if you make your kids verbalize, and I want you to remind them to think of commas as slowing the sentence down, all three of those wrong answer choices slowed the sentence down in the wrong place. So again, a sentence is like a street that you pave, and the punctuation marks will either slow the cars on the street down, called the words, or they will stop them at the end. And so, since when you verbalize they, comma, it doesn't make sense, and neither do the other ones, the best answer would be uh, when my friends heard the news, comma. What kind of and question is that? That's that's an inline choice. All of these are in line with each other, and it's a drop-down menu. So that would be question number 14 from the constructed type responses worth 1 point. Last one, and then we're done with our sixth grade in-depth study. Select a response that corrects the error. So again, I see the word error, and I see sentence 2. So more than likely, the mistake is going to be capitalization, usage, subject verb agreement, punctuation, yellow or red, or spelling. All of the effort you invest in developing your skills, okay? Effort is singular, is worth it when you finally perform on stage before an appreciative crowd. So let's see what was there before in sentence 7, okay? And again, if you only have, let me get my imaginary yellow highlighter. At least you were able to do that online, and we're going to focus. So on this passage, all they were needing to really do was look at 2 sentences out of 8. And so if you think of this fractionally speaking, this passage only had 2 out of 8, 1/4 of the questions that had errors that needed to be corrected. And so do I need to read every single sentence? No. If the question is a usage question, then sometimes yes, you have to read the sentence before to see, is the subject singular or plural? Is the predicate past, present, or future? So let's take a look and see. Number 7, all we're going to be replacing what word it said. Uh, we're going to replace the word after skills. So where is that word after skills? There it is. Okay, so that means that's going to be taken out. Are is a word, and so is, being, were, and have been. So because they're all words, the mistake that you're talking about here is usage, meaning how is it being used in the context of the sentence. So when we look at it up here, all of the effort, a singular idea, you invest in developing your skills are, not the skills are, but we're talking about the effort. So the effort is worth it. And a lot of adults will make that mistake. They'll connect the are or is to the previous word instead of to the subject of the sentence. They're talking about the effort, not the skills, if that makes sense. So when we read it correctly, all the effort you invest in developing your skills, that effort, the subject of the sentence, is worth it when you finally perform on stage before an appreciative crowd. Being worth it doesn't make sense. Were worth it. If I haven't even performed in front of a crowd, uh, I don't think it would be past tense. And so, your students might in their notes, because you're allowed to, in the online test, I saw that there's a note section. They can write were past, have been past, is present, and being present. So since being and is are the two present, and it sounds like this is a present tense word that I need, I've got to figure out which one is the better one, and it's the word is. All the effort is worth it. So remind your kids to connect to the subject, to look for that, and not just the word that happens to be next to your verb that you have in the sentence. So um, just as a reminder, for the short answer, based on all of the answers that I was able to see from 3rd through 10th grade, and some things they posted on the TEI website as a guide to what gets a 1 or a 2 or a 0. The big idea on a 2 is the student clearly answers the question, red light, using supporting evidence from the selection, yellow light. And I'll let you read the rest of that on their own. Okay. How do you get a 1? Well, there's 4 different ways. The student clearly answers the question, but has no supporting evidence from the selection. So yes, answer, no evidence. The student uses relevant text evidence, but does not have an accurate answer. So if you only have the red light or the yellow light, then you can only give the paper a 1. Based on the specific question being asked, the student's answer to the question is too vague. In other words, you can't really tell if it's being answered. The text used is not relevant or related to the answer given. You could give a 1 for that because the answer is not specific enough. The answer that's written in sentence form is too vague. Or D, if the question, that short answer, happens to have 2 parts or relates to two passages, like our extended essay number 9 in this today's lesson, the answer and or supporting evidence is only provided for 1 part or 1 passage, or in the case of this one selection. You have to give an answer based on both articles, the evidence based on both articles, and then use examples of that evidence, the ones that you think are the best. And so some people have asked me, Bill, how do you decide what evidence the kids should use? Well, the kids who are very insightful and unique can probably use evidence that less kids would think to connect their ideas and the way they explain them. The kids who struggle with reading and writing, probably it's best to have them pick what's the simplest evidence that's very obvious, or the most generic, the simplest, that can answer my question, that I can use to answer the question, and use that as the evidence. And so sometimes your kids, in order to have the best chance for getting the 2, you might have them look at the question, red light, and instead of trying to come up with an answer, have them look for text, the evidence, the yellow light, that ties to that topic or that question. And that way, for sure, they can get the 1, and then they can figure out, how do I put that in my own words using an answer to the question? How does this evidence tie with this question or this topic? So that does it. I'm sure this is probably an over 2-hour video. And as I mentioned, that most of my videos were going to be anywhere between 20 minutes to an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. But I felt like, because we're now getting into the nitty gritty, to parts 3, 4, and 5. From now on, if you're in the CREST training, I want to connect to parts 3, 4, and 5. Um, what I'll do next is I'm going to share a passage that I wrote um, or that I used that has just what we saw here, some constructed responses, some short answer, and some extended essay question. Now, what I did not include was editing and revising. So what I'm going to suggest that you do is watch, if you're in the CREST training and you get to receive this passage, then pay close attention to how I make the editing connection while we're doing the questions for this passage. So, like I mentioned, if you're still watching throughout this video, if you are a teacher who would like the PDF copy of this test that I put everything all in one place, the passages, the questions, the answers, and the color coding of red, yellow, and green, go ahead and email me at that email address right up there, writing_doctor@yahoo.com. Message me if you have any questions. If you see that TEA has released the final version of the rubrics and scoring guides for short answer and or extended essay responses for reading, science, social studies, biology, go ahead and let me know so that I can share that with all of our teacher friends. Thank you so much again, like I said, to all of my Facebook friends, my followers. Some of you are my fans. Some of you say that you're my fanatics. You're like my stalkers, but I wouldn't call it that. I'm just gonna call you my faithful fans, and some of you who are my very dear friends. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for letting me be part of your future success. I pray tremendous success for you. One of you asked me this week, are you going to go ahead and do what you had mentioned in one of your CREST online trainings? Are you going to turn the 3rd through 10th grade reading tests into online tests with some constructed short answer and extended questions? Yes, I will for sure have one. I'll turn each grade level, and then I'll try to do this by the end of this first semester, so that any of you who are giving benchmarks, I'll have it, number one, in an online format where you can just type your name and a code, like those of you that have been doing it so far. And number two, it will be a release test, but it will have some constructed responses kind of built in, 2 short answer questions that are supposedly writing related, but reading driven questions based on answering a question and giving evidence, and one usually 2-part extended essay question that's either character based or plot based, theme based. As you can see, take a look at all of the topics they gave in the samples from 3rd through 10th grade, and you're going to see that almost all of them had to do with characters, and some of them were about plot, some of them were about mood or tone or attitudes, emotions, themes. Only one, this one that we read about in 6th grade, was related to uh, a, an article written about um, that weird word. I'm gonna say it one more time just to get that in my head for you guys. The Silmarillion, and the George Washington portrait. Now, because the portrait was drawn by a person named Stewart, I want you to notice that that article made several references to his character and his personality and his ability to make people pay more attention uh, when he was drawing them. The other, the other article was written about the um, son of J.R. Tolkien named Christopher, who finished one of his, actually three or four of his unfinished products, and the determination, the hard work, the stick to itiveness that you have. And so, even though those were informative passages, they were information about certain people in the past and what they did. So, they were based on events or experiences in certain places about certain people. And so that has to do with P and E, the people, the places, the events. So message me or put in the comment section something that you enjoyed most about this lengthy lesson. Um, if you're a Crest Online teacher, I would love for you to answer one of those two short answer questions using your own words and using your own text. And what I do, if some of you uh, do answer it and send it to me as an email, what I'll do is I'll share, because I think with all of us together, because there's a lot of you that have joined Crest. And so if 10 or 20 of you give me an answer with evidence, what I'll do is I'll put them all together with red and yellow so that you can have sort of like a mini scoring guide of here's a bunch of responses from different teachers. And what I'll do is I'll look at your responses and I'll give if you actually um, do my responses to my short answer that I do have on the online tests, then I actually get to see your response because I can download uh, your response once it's finished, as just the same as you can download and see what you wrote, because I made sure that you have access in case you decide to give some of those online new test formats tests to your students. So God bless you guys. Uh, Share or tag your reading and writing teacher friends. My next video will be solely for Crest teachers. It'll be using a middle school level passage to answer questions that are, and of course it'll be shorter because I won't have any editing or revising, and I made the passage shorter. Um, so hopefully it won't take quite as long. Thank you for your patience if you watched this to the very end. If you did, I want you to email this word or this phrase to me. I'm amazing. That's all I want you to write. I'm amazing. That way I'll know that you read the entire thing, and that will be worth 20 points for those of you who are participating, because one of you in the Crest training does win a free training at your campus or your district once we're finished. with the fifth part. And so what we'll do for the rest of the time is kind of merge parts 3, 4, and 5 so that we can kind of mix. I think we're getting the idea now. I'll share one of my own passages using parts 3, 4, and 5, and then I'll share a seventh grade, the seventh grade, and that way you can see based on actual TEA information, what do the tests look like, and how is Bill McDonald making his own tests based on that information. So then I'll do another passage, and then I'll do eighth grade. And then, like I mentioned, I will go ahead and make a released test benchmark that has constructed type responses, uh, two short answer, one extended essay. What I'll try to do is I'll try to have grade level appropriate because some of them they don't ask. Like I think I noticed that for elementary they won't ask a text entry question. I think that one's only for secondary and higher, and that's in a document that I sent you. The breakdown of the kinds of questions that your students can get. So thanks so much for your time. Have a blessed rest of your week. God bless you and yours. Bye.